There's a crisis in news media that's not about clicks, cash, or even coverage. It's about comprehension. If you like my alliteration, wait for it, because a new national study from the News Literacy Project called Biased, Boring, and Bad, Unpacking Perceptions of News Media and Journalism Among U.S. Teens, found that nearly half of America's teens believe reporters make up quotes, and more think journalists are skilled at lying, or more skilled at lying than informing the public. These aren't adults burned out on partisan news. They're Gen Z and Gen Alphas, the audiences who will soon decide whether journalism has a future at all. And if young people don't understand what journalism is, how the heck can they even trust us, or even more, pay for us? Hi, I'm Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P Magazine, and this is E&P Reports, the vodcast where we go beyond the headlines to talk with leaders shaping the future of news. My guest today is Peter Adams, Senior Vice President of Research and Design at the News Literacy Project, the NLP, where he leads curriculum development, professional learning, and research initiatives designed to help young people and communities understand how credible news works. Before joining NLP, Peter taught English and social studies in New York City, led student media programs in Chicago. He spent years helping teachers and journalists bridge the knowledge gap between the newsroom and the next generation. Peter, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you, sir.
Great to be with you, Mike. Thanks so much.
This is kind of stark and scary stuff that you released recently, but I think it's a kind of a wake-up call. Would you agree?
I would. The public attitudes about news media have been the subject of polls in recent years, quite a few. And our attempt with this was to kind of get inside some of that data about trust, to understand kind of what's going on and what's driving that trust. And I think we got to some important findings in this report on that front.
Big time. Today we'll dig into NLP's new report. And when we come back, Peter will explain what today's teens really think of the press and why the biggest problem may not be mistrust, but misunderstanding. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Walter Hussman. Our family has been in the news business for over 100 years. Journalism includes two parts: reporting the news and providing opinions. But in recent years, there's been too much opinion appearing in news reporting. This has eroded public trust in news reporting to the lowest level of any U.S. institution. To address this, we started a nonprofit, the Center for Integrity in News Reporting.
The Center for Integrity in News Reporting, CFINR, is on a mission to rebuild public trust in journalism, one newsroom and one classroom at a time. We champion the effort to have news organizations and journalism schools create and prominently display their own clear, concise statements of core journalistic values. Learn more by visiting the Center for Integrity in News Reporting site at cfinr.org.
Peter, let's start with the headline finding that 84% of teens describe news media negatively. When you saw that number, what went through your mind, sir?
Well, I was disheartened and upset, obviously, as a big believer in the importance of standards-based information and the role it plays in our information ecosystem, but not surprised, right? Because I've been doing this work long enough and tracking public sentiments about, quote, the media long enough to understand that a lot of people love to hate the media, but they don't always think very clearly about it and don't always understand how newsrooms do and don't operate and what sets them apart from everyone else. And that's what we were really trying to get to here.
How do you distinguish between healthy skepticism and what your report calls harmful cynicism about the news media industry?
Yeah, so, we hear this a lot from educators, that they want to teach students to be skeptical of everything they see, which is great, especially in today's information flows on social media. We underscore, though, that you shouldn't be equally skeptical of everything you see, because there are some big differences in so-called content creators out there. We know from talking with teens and working with teens and now polling teens that they tend to view journalism just like any other kind of content. In the predecessor report to this follow-up, we found that teens don't think that journalists are any more credible than any other content creator online, that they are more impartial. or more fact-based, and I think that's a troubling finding. So the difference there, is cynicism. I think points at the idea that all content creators have some sort of secret agenda, that they're trying to manipulate you, that they have ulterior motives. And that's something that we really think can cause students to be vulnerable to low quality information sources, conspiratorial sites, extremist rhetoric, and so it's a deep concern.
At the opening, we mentioned that this striking point. Half of the teens think journalists make up quotes. What does that tell you about how little they understand, or maybe everyone understands the process of reporting?
Yeah, it's actually a little bit worse than that. Half of them think that journalists make up quotes always, almost always, or often, not just once in a while. We know, people in journalism know that fabricating sources and quotes and major plagiarism scandals, things like that, major breaches of ethics, do happen, but they're extraordinarily rare. And I think the steps that news organizations take following those scandals is an important signal of credibility. Going back over every single thing that reporter ever wrote, it is certainly job ending and usually career ending when something like that happens, when a major breach of ethics happens. So we asked students about 8 actions and how often they think journalists and professional news organizations engage in those kinds of actions. 4 of them are highly ethical and constitutive of what it means to practice journalism. 4 were really unethical, and one of those, as you mentioned, was fabricating or making up quotes for sources, which again, half of students thought happens always, almost always, or often in standards-based newsrooms.
I'm not making jest of this, but I was fascinated by the finding that when teens picture journalists, most can't name any. And those who could mention Spider-Man. Okay, what does it mean that our most recognized reporter in this generation is a fictional superhero with a camera?
So we have a little more context on that question. We asked them for representations of journalists and entertainment media, and most really struggled to come up with any, and the ones who did thought of either Spider-Man or thought of Anchorman, Ron Burgundy. So one line of inquiry in the report is trying to understand where some of these ideas and misconceptions about journalism come from. And we know that journalists are often misportrayed in popular entertainment media as conniving, as willing to do anything for the story, including paying sources and cutting ethical corners. And so we wanted to know if that was a driver here. Did not really appear to be a major driver, at least directly, as far as students could understand, although we think the ambient effect of just sort of negativity and lack of ethics kind of sticks, right? If it's something that's in the air in terms of popular culture, and of course it's in our political rhetoric as well, that it has an effect on us.
Just got back from a conference in Colorado Springs that was hosted by America's Newspapers. They released new data that they did in conjunction with Coda Research that reaffirms that local news trust is far higher than national media, or we like to call those silos or echo chambers. Did your data reflect any difference in how youth perceives local versus national news outlets?
Not in this follow-up report. We didn't ask them, to parse between those sources. The predecessor report to this, so what we released in November of 2025 is a recontact follow-up survey with a group of teens that we had surveyed previously in 2024 for our News Literacy in America report. In that report, we asked them which news outlets they trust the most. And those tended to be national, and that might have been the way the question was framed, but they mentioned CNN and Fox News, by a pretty big margin over all other sources of news. But I have been tracking that. We've obviously been tracking the differences in national and local. I kind of chalk it up to, national news organizations kind of fit into this mental bucket of, quote, the media, which is this detached thing that's very easy to cast your frustrations on, to blame for frustrations about the way the world is working, about the fact that more people don't agree with me, the way I see the world. Whereas local news has much more of an immediate connection in people's lives, and I think it's easier for people to see the value and the utility of that journalism. and a little bit harder for them to sort of engage in that kind of scapegoating behavior. That's always been my take on it. I don't have data though to back that
But
up.
I can back that up in a way. I recently, or not recently, a couple of years ago at a Burrell conference, the final session it was excellent. They showed the local students in media and journalism on the stage, showing some of the amazing social media projects they were working on. On that, I stood up and asked a basic question. I said, "Can you name the newspaper of the town you were born in or grew up in, and any of the local news outlets?" None could. I mean, does that surprise you or not? I mean, is this a challenge to local publishers today that they're not even known by this generation?
I think so. I mean, the obviously the information environment has changed a tremendous amount in the last 25 years. It hasn't been that long ago since the advent of the first iPhone, since, Facebook kind of came on the scene, relatively speaking. For this generation, though, they've grown up in that very frenetic information environment with much, much more information, not just coming at them, but targeting them, their interests, their ideas, the things they're inclined to engage with, right? Suggestion algorithms are powerful, powerful things. And so, it's very hard for them to pull themselves away from that stream. And I think it's hard for an entity like a local paper to break through with young people, which, I think was a challenge even before we had TikTok. And now that we have Instagram and TikTok and all the things sort of vying for their attention, it's gotten even harder.
All right, let's circle back to the report. It stresses the importance of showing how journalism works, verifying, fact checking, correcting errors. How can publishers, and this is maybe back to your opinion, how can local publishers make that process more visible without boring or overwhelming the readers they're trying to attract?
That's a challenge, right? So to recap the study, we asked them about 8 specific actions and asked a frequency question. How often do you think professional journalists and the organizations they work for do these things? And 4 of them, again, were not just ethical, but they're really like constitutive of what it means to do journalism, right? Gather information from multiple sources, confirm facts before reporting or publishing them, cover stories that help protect the public's interest. I think these are things that professional journalists think of as their job, like part of what they do, why they do what they do, and how they do it, and then correcting errors when they happen. And we found that, between 23% of teens think that news organizations almost always, or often correct errors when they happen. And virtually, any credible news source is going to correct an error of fact when they happen. Only about 29% thought that they gather information from multiple sources on a regular basis, always, almost always, or often. 30% confirming facts before reporting them, and 31% covering stories that protect the public's interest. These are roughly half the rate at which students think, or young people think, that news organizations do the highly unethical things we mentioned, which hover around 49 to 60% of students think that news organizations always, almost always, or often do things like give advertisers special treatment, like there is no firewall between editorial and business, or make up details such as quotes, which we already talked about, or do favors for sources, or pay them for information, or take photos and videos out of context and lie about them and say there's something they're not. These are things that students have gotten the impression that news organizations do all the time, and they're extraordinarily rare. And the stuff that they do all the time, only about a quarter think that they do at least often. Which is concerning, right? So it speaks to the fact that where there may be some slice of the trust issue that is deserved, there is a significant portion of it that we feel is driven by misperceptions about the way newsrooms operate and how they do what they do.
All right, let me go back to how I frame this question. I'm always accused of being a Pollyanna or too positive. In other words, I believe that this Madisonian experiment that's 250 years old will survive, and that includes a free, unfettered press final check on power, and it will always be there. Now, you describe news literacy as a civic competency, not just a media one. What does that mean to you and to your organization for the future of democracy? And moreover, how can journalists position themselves as partners in civic learning, not just as information providers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we see it as a civic competency because we want students to understand the role that standards-based verified information about current events and issues play in their lives and in the larger information ecosystem, right? So all the decisions they make, the opinions they form and the actions they take are based on some information, right? But in their daily lives, on platforms that are made to make all content look just like content, one after the other, right? Doesn't matter who it came from, it's just content, content, content in their streams. Unless they're taught to consciously distinguish between a hard news report from a standards-based news organization, a hot take from someone they know, a sensational claim without evidence from someone they don't know, unless they're making those kinds of distinctions as a matter of habit and then can evaluate the credibility and the strength of evidence and to understand misinformation patterns, all the things we teach, they're left vulnerable to just a hodgepodge of information that plays on their biases, that plays on their emotions, that it plays on their identities in really tricky ways. And so we do see it as a civic competency, not just so they can make sound decisions for themselves and their families and their loved ones, so they can avoid being exploited and manipulated and influenced by bad actors. And also so they understand the role that information plays, even if their news habits are sound, even if they are turning to credible sources. People in their community who are being targeted by low quality information sites or bad actors can have an effect on them as well, right? Everybody votes in a democracy, or everybody can. And so, the way people are consuming information, the kinds of things that they're being targeted with in terms of propaganda and misinformation have an effect on everybody. And that's the kind of civic side of this that I think a lot of teens sometimes miss.
Attention spans are another thing we report on, Peter, and that's why we try to keep these interviews to 20 minutes or less. So I'm going to have to close it out by asking you personally, since you devour and work with all this data, are you as optimistic as I am? Can we reverse this distrust cycle before Gen Z and Gen Alpha tune us out for good? Do you see hope somewhere embedded in all this data, sir?
I do. I think that even as we see more and more local news organizations sadly disappear, and I hope that's a trend that we can reverse. There's strong evidence that we have in our work and others that media literacy education is not just something that works, which I'll talk about in a minute, but also something teens want. So in that first survey we did, 94% of teens said they think media literacy should be part of their educations. I think they recognize the complexity of the information climate that they're in, the platforms that they're trying to navigate and use, and the tools. Generative AI has just made that a whole lot more difficult again. So this is really something that we owe to this generation of students, right, to grapple with this. We also know that any exposure to media literacy, even a single lesson, is associated with more active news habits, students seeking out more news. We found this in our first survey, as well as higher levels of trust. And students who have no media literacy is associated with higher levels of kind of news finds me and distrust. And so we see evidence in our work, in the learning gains that we see on our resources, that we can make a significant increase in students' understanding and appreciation of the watchdog role, their understanding of what comprises credibility, their ability to evaluate evidence, and other key skills. And so I think it's really another thing newsrooms can do is to get behind these efforts to really teach news and media literacy in a nuanced and assertive way. Even requiring it for graduation, we think, is something that's really important.
Peter Adams of the News Literacy Project, reminding us all that, if I may be so bold, truth isn't just earned, it's taught. And if today's young people believe journalism is biased, boring, and bad, those are yours words, Peter, not mine. Correct me if I'm wrong, the solution isn't retreat, it's re-education. Do I have that right, sir?
Yes, absolutely. I think we have to go, and the news media and the press, obviously need to engage in self-reflection where we can improve the process of journalism and transparency and all the values that we espouse, fairness and accountability, but also to be really clear-eyed about how the public perceives the work, and also kind of the effect of this rhetoric that I think we have to assertively answer to, and not just ignore as noise in the background.
You can find the complete report for free, thank you, at newslit.org. You can get more information on the landing page of this series this episode series, I should say, at editorandpublisher.com/vodcast. Peter, thanks for your valuable time. Keep in touch with us and keep churning out the data, sir.
We will try, Mike. Thanks so much again.